For all those who came before, we will reach the mountain top together. The dream can come true if we follow through. There's nothing we cannot do if we rise together. At this critical time, we'll make the words come alive. Hope and history rhyme when we rise together. We must build back better. Hold on to hope, keep it alive. When they go low, we go high. Make your voice heard, go spread the word. It's all on the line. We were born of a dream, equal and free. I promise we'll never surrender. Time to do all we can before it's too late. We choose our own fate together. The dream can come true if we follow through. There's nothing we cannot do if we rise together. At this critical time, we'll make the words come alive. Hope and history.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Democratic Club. Today, we have a special program that's going to help us learn a little bit more about the Gavin Newsom recall election. This is a big deal for Democrats, and so I know we're all going to pay attention. Our speaker today is Bill James. He is the chair of Santa Clara County Democratic Party. Welcome, Bill. And your moderator is Bob Lapidus. Before we get started, I'd like to remind the audience that during today's presentation, while Bill is giving us some preliminary information, we would like you to use the Q&A feature to issue your questions via typing them in and then submitting them so that Bill can answer those at the end of the talk. You can also refer to the chat feature where we will include some of the references that might be mentioned during today's conversation, such as the website for the SCCDP. So watch the chat room for that. Until then, I'll hand you over to Bob Lapidus. Hi, Bob.
Hello. Hi, Diane. Thank you so much. Hello, everybody out there. This is a very important session. I know as strong Democrats, we're all very interested in what Bill is about to tell us about, and it's really important that we get out there and exercise our right to vote. It's going to be really important that the base comes out and supports a no vote on this. I'd just like to say a few words about my friend Bill James. I have to say that Bill James is a working encyclopedia of all things Democratic, both local and national, from my experience. So when Bill says something, you can take it to the bank. And I was reading about, didn't know much about Bill's bio actually before today, but I found out that he's a Naval Academy graduate, is that right? That's what I saw. He's been the chair of the Santa Clara Democratic Party here since January of 2017 and was reelected in January 2019. Congratulations, Bill. So he attended the Naval Academy, as I mentioned. He majored in mechanical engineering history. That's an unusual major. I was good in history, but I was terrible at things like engineering and science. Let's see. Bill also then attended Stanford University, and he's a lawyer as well. And he's done a lot of work having to do with mental health awareness in various counties around here. And he's married, has 3 kids, a daughter aged 16 and boys aged 14 and 12. Good luck with that, Bill. I remember when I had 3 teenagers all at once. That was quite a challenge. Prior to having kids, Bill and his wife lived in Mexico for an academic year under a Fulbright scholarship. And he was awarded to study law and business he is proficient in Spanish. So, ¿cómo está, Bill?
Muy bien, gracias.
Okay, very good. I'll turn it over to you at this point and go for it.
Well, thank you, Bob, for that kind introduction and validation and encouragement. I include all that in my bio so that the people I work with in democratic politics understand why sometimes it takes me a day to call them back. I'm a full-time working patent attorney. I'm engaged in the Silicon Valley economy. There's benefits to that, but of course my time is limited. And I'm a dad too, and an engaged dad of my teenagers. So those, of course, always come kind of first. But my Democratic Party work is really important to me. And we're going to talk today about what we're doing recently. I go through seasons in this job where the Democratic Party stuff does become more important than my regular day job. And this tight timeline of this recall election campaign is really making this one of those times. But I'm about to share some slides. Before I do that, I just want to thank everybody for inviting me and for attending this webinar meeting of the Villages Democratic Club. It's one of my favorite clubs. Thank you for inviting me back. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you. And I appreciate your activism. I know in the 2020 cycle, there was a lot of support that we felt we had from the villages for our fundraising for slate mailers and to walk some pieces to Democratic doorsteps and doors in your neighborhoods in the villages. So thank you for that. So I'm going to share my screen. And we're mostly going to talk about a pretty scary set of information, I find, about the recall election. Let me see if I can make this go away. I don't want to mess with this. I'm going to leave it like that, if I may. Is that visible enough, Bob?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So I'm Bill James. I'm chair of the Democratic Party. And the good news is that the recall is scary. We should be afraid because if we don't do the work, if we're not inspired to do the work to get our vote out, it's just too easy to lose this kind of thing. So these things are going to be arriving in the mail soon. What we need Democrats to do is to return their ballot by mail and vote no. And that, fortunately, they can do that by mail. So this is the imagery that the recall campaign has been using since January. A lot of activists don't like it for two reasons. One is that at the time the political consultants came up with this imagery, it was really right after the January 6 events. And I think they thought this would be motivating for Democrats to avoid having national Republicans come in with their money and organizing efforts to get rid of our Democratic governor in a Democratic state. That's true that that's what was happening. The organizers of the recall, they were the 6th or 7th recall attempt of Gavin Newsom. There's always some crackpot organization trying to recall the governor of California because the rules are so permissive. But they almost never quite get to the required number of votes. But two things happened here. One is that national Republicans put a bunch of money into it to kind of like take a shot back at us after we dumped Trump. And then the second thing is that the judge extended the signature deadline very significantly so that the people gathering signatures could continue to accumulate them. So more recently, the governor came out with his May budget update, and we saw for a while this positive imagery, this California roars back. And I think this is still an important part of their theme. It's the California comeback plan. Fortunately, the budget had about $100 billion available. The state did more than they expected. So the governor was able to do some very specific and positive and democratic things that should help him in the election. But that was May, and a lot has happened since then, as we'll talk about a bit more. So this California comeback plan, it's citing the strength of the economic recovery, which is continuing. It's spending some money, significant money, to address homelessness and housing needs, which have gotten much worse during the pandemic. It is transforming public schools into gateways for opportunities. Well, that's a way of saying money for schools and investing in schools in smart ways. Investing in infrastructure, which now is getting some national attention, and money to combat wildfires and take on climate change. Those are all continuing to be very relevant points. Now, the calendar for the recall, we know that the election has been set for Tuesday, September 14th. There are 46 replacement candidates on the ballot. We'll have a look at the ballot in just a minute. And they are vote by mail ballots, and they're all supposed to be mailed to voters starting on August 16th, which means that some of them might be getting placed with post offices to get mailed so that they arrive on Monday, August 16th. And that'll vary a little bit across the state. You may have received, by the way, your voter guide Where's my, sorry, I didn't expect to use it as a visual aid, but this is the voter guide. It doesn't want like my background. And the voter guide is the booklet that tells you how to vote. And there's no good news for us in the voter guide, I can tell you that. But we'll talk about that as well. But your actual ballot that you're going to be able to vote and mail back in should arrive sometime next week. If it doesn't arrive by the end of the week, you should go to the registrar's site and start wondering why it didn't come. You know that we have been changing voting throughout most of the state, including in Santa Clara County. So drop boxes should be available for voting starting next Tuesday. So the whole period of the election, from when ballots get mailed until election day, September 14th, in Santa Clara County, you'll be able to go to these drop boxes. And the voter guide actually has locations of those, and the registrar of voters website does as well. The vote centers have replaced polling places, so there's fewer of them, but they have longer hours, and then they start to open in advance of election day. So for people who like to vote in person, then vote centers will be opening starting September 4th, and that includes some weekend days, but then all the voting centers will be open starting the Saturday before the September 14th election day. And again, those will be in the voter guide that you got by mail. But it's easy to mail it back. So the easy thing to do is to take your ballot, mark no on the recall question, and mail it back. And then voter registration is an interesting thing. There's technically a deadline to register by August 30th, but now in California, even if you don't register by then, you're entitled to complete a conditional registration anytime all the way up until the election day, including on election day, and file, if you need to, a provisional ballot. And then provided that your registration checks out, your provisional ballot will be counted. So these are keys to victory. Now, it's interesting, we're going to update this a little bit because these are slides that I used about a month ago, and some of this information is already a little bit shaky because of COVID, basically. But the keys to victory we've identified is getting Californians, particularly Democrats, to acknowledge Gavin Newsom's leadership during the pandemic. He's done a good job. It's a really complicated thing. It's like having a tourniquet. If you've ever had first aid training, you know, a tourniquet, people are bleeding in a way where they're just going to bleed to death. And so you apply a tourniquet to really stop the flow of blood to that limb or that area. But if you just do that, then there can be irreversible damage to tissues that might otherwise be able to be saved in that limb. And so if after a certain amount of time, you ease it up a little bit and you let some blood flow, but then to keep the person from bleeding to death, you put it back on again, and you hope for the kind of assistance that will more fundamentally address the problem that's going on. And so we've had to do that in California and in the country. It's been extremely hard balancing act. And it's almost like no matter what you do in this leadership role, you're going to be criticized. Some parents are unhappy because their kids aren't in school. Others are glad to have them at home and unhappy that they're being asked to go back. Some people feel really comfortable because the kids are wearing masks at school, and others feel like it's an intrusion of their freedom. Not around here, but you know, in some places. So it's a hard thing. It's a hard thing to do, and he's walked that line very carefully. The governor has a lot of accomplishments as governor, even before the pandemic. There's a lot of good democratic legislation that's gone on. Protections for LGBTQ people, investments in California in smart ways, changes in the way we vote that's made it easier to vote by mail. All of these things have been things that Governor Newsom has been, with the legislature enacting now that we have a Democratic governor and a Democratic legislature with a supermajority. Future priorities. If you look at the candidates and the recall, almost none of them align with the future priorities for California for the overwhelming numbers of Californians. Governor Newsom has California on a path to have only zero emission cars by 2035. That's not long from now, and that's a very ambitious environmental agenda. And by comparison, the leading Republican candidate to replace him doesn't believe in, that the government should really be involved in addressing climate change. He's not that worried about it. He doesn't think there needs to be a minimum wage. He doesn't believe in abortion or the reproductive freedoms. They believe in freedom, but not that every woman and family should get to choose for themselves in consultation with their own doctor whether to have an abortion. So these candidates that would replace Newsom are entirely out of alignment with the overwhelming majority of Californians. So we'll be successful if we turn out our votes. You may have read about polls that showed a close race, and the reason is that they're heavily discounting Democratic participation based on what Democrats were telling them about how much they'd heard about the recall election and how important it was to them. By contrast, the Republicans behind the recall are all excited about it. They see it as their chance to, they've got like 1/4 of the Californians are registered as Republicans. They see it as their chance to put a Republican governor in place despite that imbalance. A victory will be successful if Democrats perceive it in a national lens. If Democrats perceive it as being something that Trump and national Republicans are doing to California, which is true based on the money that's come in, I haven't seen that getting much traction, but that's one of the things that could happen. And then the driverless clown car is my dismissive way of saying, look at the list of candidates. There isn't anybody there that Californians would want to have as their governor. So here are risk factors, and these are risk factors that I identified a couple months back. One is a resurgent COVID, because they rushed this campaign so that, because I think they hoped that the recovery that was going on in May, June on COVID would continue, and that people would be more and more free this summer and would be feeling really good about California. And the story about Newsom doing a good job in the pandemic would resonate. Now, I think he has done a good job. I think that's a very strong position, but it's just a question of how the average person feels. Most of us feel some kind of ranging from anxiety to exhaustion to being annoyed and frustrated with having to go back to wearing masks indoors and having this variant be an undefined additional aspect of the threat of COVID. And when people are concerned, they are less likely, at some margin, are less likely to vote for an incumbent. And so that's unfortunate. Droughts and wildfires, we're having a bad drought. I don't think there's anything Gavin Newsom could do about the drought right now. In fact, the recall election is probably having him speak less about it than he probably would be helpful to. But we are experiencing a drought. Some central parts of the state are experiencing very significant impact of a reduction in federal water, and some agricultural areas are really suffering. And then, of course, we have the big wildfires going on in the north and eastern parts of the state. The French Laundry problem is that's Newsom's tendency to shoot himself in the foot just a little bit. That was an incident where he went to some kind of political event at the French Laundry restaurant in the Napa area, and it makes him look like an out-of-touch elitist who's not following his own health minister's advice about what to do. And he's just going to have to own that as a problem and give the mea culpa. So hopefully we'll get it past that. Employment Development Department, that seems to have receded in people's attention. I think that the employment numbers are interesting because they've gone up and down and up and down. And I think that they've, in general, the employment picture is better, so that the strain on the Employment Development Department, which is basically the unemployment insurance agency, has been reduced. And then disaffected left. Yeah, this I hear less about now. The left seems, the progressive wing of the Democratic Party seems to be lining up behind the no campaign, and in fact is actively campaigning for no. So I think that early on people thought, well, why should I work for Newsom? I don't like Newsom. He's too moderate a Democrat for me. I would prefer a more liberal Democrat. There is no way we're going to get a better Democratic governor out of this process. And we're only going to end up with a disaster, probably a Republican governor. And so now liberals, I think, are helping on our side. Now, these are the greatest risk factors, I think, next to COVID. That is confusion and delusion. Less delusion. Delusion is kind of like we could get rid of Newsom and get a better Democrat, which I think people now realize can't happen. But confusion is a real risk. And part of it is a confusing campaign message and strategy. So this here, I'm sorry that the size is probably small, but this is from the voter guide that I showed earlier. Inside the voter guide, there's a picture of what the ballot's going to look like. And it's going to be a big card, but it's going to have two sides. It's going to have this first side where up at the top, they've got this official ballot information. Then they've got this box, and then they've got these big words in the middle that says vote for a replacement candidate. To do that, flip to the other side. Which of course we don't want people to do. The Democrats are saying don't vote for a replacement candidate. So what you have to realize is that this is the place where you vote for Gavin for no. So we've got to get people to pay attention to the part right under the instructions on the first side that to me doesn't even look like a ballot. It looks like an example of the ballot. And in fact, if you look at the detail, we need them to fill in this little no block. That's the no block right there in the circle, and realize that that's the one vote that we want Democrats to give.
Right.
And now here, you see these words. These are the scary words about vote for a replacement candidate. And you can see those words are bigger than like Gavin Newsom. So basically, to me, when you look at this whole front card, it looks like vote for a replacement candidate. It's like you're being told to flip it over. And if you look at what draws your eye first, you might flip it over before you get to the no up here. And so then there's also this that says vote both sides, but it also tells you to turn over. And so if you get down to that print down there, you might realize like, oh, okay, well, that means there must be something to vote on this side. So you might go back up and find it, but I worry that people might not. So we need them to vote no here. Before they turn the card over, in fact, this is the thing that looks like a ballot, right? And you won't find Gavin Newsom here. You'll look at this side and you'll say, how do I vote no? How do I vote to support Gavin Newsom? Do I circle his name? I don't know what to do here. And the problem is that to fit 46 replacement candidates on the ballot, they're printed on this side altogether. So here, if you start flipping through, another problem is that as you look through here, you'll find some people who are registered as Democrats and identify their party preference as Democrat. And none of those people are good people that would be a good governor. They're random people with no experience in government who thought it'd be funny to put their name in to be governor. And that's what, California, the fifth biggest economy in the world, it would be a very significant country if we were a country. This is what our democracy is reduced to by the recall rules. So what are we going to do about all that? Well, we have to talk to voters because they're going to be confused by this ballot, right? And so what the campaign has asked us to say is only get people to vote no, and then just ignore all these replacement candidates, don't do anything on the second side. And one question that comes up repeatedly is, well, that's confusing. People are going to think they're doing a wrong thing. And I would say that what I would say to you in talking to your neighbors and friends and family members about how to vote is that if they're not comfortable just leaving this side blank, to pick a non-Republican who they think sounds more reasonable than others. Of course, this ballot guide has statements by all of them. And I don't find any of them to be worth my vote. And there's no way to save us if we don't win on the no question. So we have to win on the no question, but if it makes people feel better, they could pick a non-Republican on this other side.
Bill, can I stop you there a second?
Yeah, sure.
So I can't really see the ballot that easily here. So the question is, do they have D next? Do some of them have D next to their name?
Let me make that part bigger. Did it get bigger? I zoomed a little bit.
Yeah.
And so what it says here is party preference. Under their name, it says their name in all capitals. Then it says party preference, Republican, and then it's again in Spanish. And then it has their job. And so here we've got a farmer, a mother, an attorney. There's nothing wrong with being a lawyer. I'm one, and I'm a parent. I'm not a farmer. But these are not people who should be governor of the state of California. And I just find it's not possible to really pick one. Here's Jeremy Marciniak. He doesn't give a party or an occupation. He probably has a statement in the ballot because he paid his money and that would get published there. But that's the kind of thing we're talking about. The one thing that's for sure is that, let me try to get this zooming right. The one thing that's for sure is that the Republicans on the ballot are actively bad. Kevin Faulconer was a former mayor of San Diego. He acts like he's a moderate and that he was successful in what is now a more democratic city. In fact, he was probably the last of the conservative right-wing mayors of San Diego as their demographic has changed. And the others are even worse. Cox is in there, the one who got 1/3 of the vote against Newsom last time. Doug Ostie's in there. And Kevin Kiley. These are very conservative Republicans who would have no hope of even getting their own party's nomination if it weren't for this ridiculous setup of the recall.
So Bill, can you clarify something for us? So
sure.
From what I understand, the Democratic Party itself did not want to have a Democratic name on this ballot. And so they haven't endorsed any of these so-called Democrats on this ballot. Is that correct?
That's true. And the reason is that they feared that people would think, well, if we have the lieutenant governor, Eleni Kounalakis, people might say, well, I don't like that Gavin Newsom. He uses too much gel in his hair. So I'm actually going to vote yes on the recall and vote for Eleni Kounalakis. The problem is that all the people voting, yes, are voting for one of these Republicans. and our person has no hope of getting up to the right number of votes. And it just ran the risk of having some segments of the party officialdom split on whether we were all in on no on the recall. Also, I mean, we remember what happened with Gray Davis. People really did think, oh, maybe Schwarzenegger's not so bad. Maybe his star power will help him be effective. And of course, he didn't have a political track record, so they didn't know. People felt that split our vote a little bit. Whereas if we just tell people to vote no on the recall, I think the problem is the way the ballot's set up. We got to get them to vote no on one side before they even get to this other side, and that's a problem. Yeah. So, by the way, you can't write in Newsom. You can't write in any name that's not an official writing candidate. There are some writing candidates that have qualified. You'd have to go to the California Secretary of State to find their names. But if a person isn't now already qualified as a write-in, writing their name in. So don't write Bill James in despite Bob's very positive biography, because that won't work. So an aside on that, there is actually a Gilroy City Councilwoman, Rebecca Armendariz, that people, for some reason or another, have been writing in as a candidate for sheriff of Santa Clara County, because the current sheriff's actually a Republican. And she always gets a certain number of votes, even though she's not qualified. So, okay. So what are we doing about it? So we're busy now, of course, because the ballots are arriving next week, and it's a vote by mail election. So the key is to get Democrats all over the state to say, I'm just going to check this thing no and mail it back in. You know, they're paying the utility bills, whatever they're doing with their mail. We want them to immediately mark no, put their ballot back in the envelope, turn it over, sign it, and date it, and mail it back in. It's a postage prepaid envelope, so it's really easy to vote. And the question is, how are we doing that? If we have this page on our website, action.sccdp.org, or if you just go to sccdp.org and go to the Action Center off to the side, you'll see images describing our organizing opportunities. The main one that we have starting next week are phone banks. So of course, we're doing phone banks from your home, from your own computer. People are getting to be pretty good at this now. If you have any trepidation about it, I encourage you to sign up, because we have people who've taught all kinds of people since the Biden campaign on into this year to do these phone banks. So we are doing a thing where we're calling Santa Clara County voters, but we're also calling Democrats in Kings County. And so if you want to be involved in talking to voters in the Central Valley, in the heart of the state, about the recall, you could choose that, but you could also choose instead to do the link that calls into Santa Clara County. So these are Wednesdays 6:30 to 8:30 and Sundays 1 to 3 p.m. Between now and the recall.
Can I just interrupt, Bob, and just reconfirm that on the phone banking, you'll be talking only to registered Democrats?
Well, that's a good question. This phone bank, the Wednesday and Sunday one, are just to registered Democrats. And so they should be an easy ask in this case, because you're not asking them for money. You're not trying to get them to pick one Democrat over another. You're just pointing out that if we don't all vote no on this recall, if we don't take that time, we'll almost certainly end up with a Republican governor. And so for Democrats, I think that's an easy ask, and it's easy enough to vote by mail. So, I think it's a good phone bank to try out, even if you're new to doing phone banks, because we are calling what we consider to be a friendly audience. Now, we also have to pay attention to 2022. So as part of that effort, we have other phone banks on Tuesdays and Saturdays where we're calling non-party preference voters in Kern County and Kings County. This is actually part of our effort with those other counties to try to influence the House race in 2022. But since the recall is top of everybody's mind, we're going to call these no party preference voters. We're going to ask them a very targeted question. We haven't decided yet. It's either going to be, do you agree that Biden was legitimately elected? Or another question is, which do you think is a bigger problem, voter fraud or access to voting by people who want to vote? And both those questions, a shockingly high number of Republicans say yes. So if you're registered as no party preference, and so you don't state your party preference in your registration, we don't know who you are. A lot of Democratic campaigns will target Democrats and no party preference, but some percentage of no party preference voters are actually very conservative pro-Trump types, and we're trying to get those people to identify themselves so we can take them off our list and not bother with them anymore. And then people who are a little more middle of the road and maybe subject to being influenced by us, we're going to go back and talk to them some more. and we're ready to talk to them about the recall. But I would say for the villages, this one on Wednesdays and Sundays is the best one because it's just Democrats.
Bill,
And
can
then,
I
yeah,
interrupt again
sure.
just briefly? I'd done some phone banking in the old days before the pandemic, and we used to end up in a common room, and we'd all sit around in a volunteers' lounge, and we'd be busy with our cell phones making phone calls. How does that work under the pandemic rules? What
So
is the phone bank?
that's a good question. If you are on the Zoom call, that means you have a way of doing audio on your computer and you have a computer that connects to the internet. And having those things, these phone banks through 2020 and into 2021 have been transformed to being virtual gatherings. So our phone banks begin with a Zoom meeting. Everybody joins the Zoom meeting and learns how to access and activate the page where you actually make the calls from. And there's and then people remain in the Zoom call, but they shift their audio over to the phone calls. And then using the same headphones in your own computer, you click on a button, and the service that the campaign is using will call a voter, and you'll see the information on your screen. So in the old days, walking doors, you might have had a clipboard with a name on it, or in a phone bank, you might have had a computer screen in front of you. And as you said, Tony, you might have called with your own phone, but now you're calling through your computer. And because it's all the magic of the internet and software, they're able to do that without revealing your personal phone number. At some point, they might ask for your phone number to be able to text you or to identify you and to associate it with your account. But your actual calls to these voters, they don't see your phone number. So they can't call you back and saying, why are you calling me or anything like that. So those are positive aspects. And the good thing about the Zoom thing is that if you get stuck, in a regular phone bank, you just kind of raise your hand and an organizer comes up to you and helps you sort out a problem. But if you get stuck in these phone banks, you just go back to the Zoom room and say, hey, can I get some help? And they'll take care of you.
Yeah.
Did you make a report? I mean, I seem to remember I had to tick a few boxes after a phone call, summarizing the key points that I covered in the call and the responses I got. Is that the same?
That's very similar. As you're making your phone call through the computer, the script that you're reading to the person you're speaking with is on your computer screen, and there are just selectable buttons that say, that help the campaign by coding information about that caller. So for the recall, if the person says, oh, yes, I'm going to vote no on the recall for sure, there's a button that says definite no. Or they might say, I've already voted no, and then it'd be a button that says already voted no. That way the data on the back end gets updated. So the same interface allows you to make those entries through the computer. And then when you're done, you say save and go on to the next one. And it closes that window, opens one for the next voter, and starts to when you're ready, it'll dial the number.
Thank you. Sounds much easier.
Yeah. And our teams are getting better at guiding people through it. So in addition, this was really successful. We didn't know that it would be successful in COVID time. We're walking we're helping voters walk in their own neighborhood. And so we're just asking people to go to 100 doors in their neighborhood. And we created a door hanger that's Spanish on one side and English on the other, and another version that's Vietnamese on one side and English on the other. So we can cover lots of different places in Santa Clara County and with language competency. And we so far have 150 people signed up to do this. So that's 15,000 doors and probably 30,000 voters by the time you count multiple Democratic voters. And that's just really a cost-effective way to reach voters as well. And it's just another way to make contact with voters. And so we're trying to keep up with the printing of the door hangers because we've had a lot of response to this. People willing to go to doors, and it's optional whether you would knock on the door or not. Some people are comfortable if they have a mask, take a few steps back. If someone comes to the door, they just say what they're there for, and they leave literature on the porch or on the door. But it's also okay just to drop it. When they have to decide, as folks know, the Democratic Party works closely with the organized labor movement. So we have an event on August 21st, which is the Saturday, a week from this Saturday. So the Saturday after, by then, pretty much everybody will have their ballot in hand. And we're all going to walk together, starting from the new Labor Temple headquarters on Zanker Road, 2302 Zanker Road. And lunch is going to be provided. So people are going to go out, walk 50 or 70 households, come back, have lunch together. This is kind of a traditional kickoff event for campaigns. And then again, action.sccdp.org is the place where we're collecting all these kind of opportunities. And then I thought I would take whatever questions there might be.
Yeah, before I turn it over to the audience, and Diane will help us with that. So we're going to have drop boxes here, and you can still use the post office. Is that correct too?
Yes, the envelope. This is just a great success of Democratic Party legislating. They had the foresight to know that this could happen, that we'd have this extra election, and they changed the state law to require that that all elections be that everybody get a vote by mail ballot, and that the vote by mail return envelope be postage paid. And so when you get your ballot, you'll see that you can vote it, put it in that envelope, sign and date it on the back, and drop it in the mail. So if you feel like, the mail had some issues at some points in the pandemic, some people might want to drop it in the official drop box. Some people may even want to take it to a vote center. But it's such an important thing. The turnout is such an important factor in our side winning this election that I think I'm encouraging people, hey, trust the post office. If we all turn it in and a few get lost, you'll still overwhelm the Republicans with their good Democratic votes.
Okay, and I assume we'll be getting some information out to people in the villages as to where the drop boxes will be. I don't know if they're going to be in the same place they were in the last election.
Yeah, that would be a good service for the club to, as I'll take as a follow-up item to help you guys make sure that you have the information. But I know that the locations are listed in the voter guide that should have come last week. Okay. And so, someone could go through and pick out the ones that are convenient to the villages and make sure that residents know that.
Okay, at this point, I'm going to turn over to Diane, who has been collecting questions for you.
Thank
you. We've actually accumulated quite a few questions. But the first thing I want to do is to make this easier for some of our listeners, our audience members. In the chat box, we've got a couple of links. If you're interested in clicking on those, opening them up, you could save that website now. And you don't have to write down the whole website because they're kind of long. Just click on it. It'll open up a new screen on your computer, and you can just save that for later on. And then come back here to our program. We'll still be talking. All right, our first question is, does the California Democratic Party anticipate any skullduggery by the GOP, for example, disappearing drop boxes in heavily Democratic areas?
So yes is the answer, and sadly, this happens every election. And it's been bad. And since Trump, there's been, we have threatening calls at our headquarters in San Jose. We've had 3 windows. They're big, expensive, commercial building windows, like a storefront window, that have cost me $500 to replace. We've had 3 of them broken in the last 2 years. So there's a lot of crazy going on. And my counterpart in Kings County in the Central Valley shared with me an experience that they had not too long ago, where the Proud Boys, who were breaking up the Capitol on January 6th, showed up at the farmers market and intimidated some of their volunteers. So this sort of thing does happen, and it happens in Republican parts of the state and Democratic parts of the state. I don't think the drop boxes are pretty well anchored to the ground, but the other things happen. And what the state party does about it is all the county chairs talk to their registrar of voters about where the drop boxes are and how they're being secured. They're supposed to be, by state law, they're required to be emptied every day. And so the loss in the case of an incident of vandalism should be minimal. But there is always this kind of thing. The California Democratic Party has a hotline that they've set up so that if people encounter problems with drop boxes or encounter problems with voting, that they can call. It's open 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. or something like that. They can call, and basically a lawyer working as a volunteer for the California Democratic Party will help them and help them resolve their issue. So that's the voter protection hotline. So it's basically the party talking to the registrar in each of the 58 counties, and the party setting up this hotline so that lawyers can swoop in and take legal action if something's going on that requires that.
Excellent, thank you. Next question. Question on registration. If I've been a registered voter with mail-in ballot regularly, do I have to re-register for voting at this election?
So there's no need to re-register unless your address has changed. If your registration address is not what it was in the recent 2020 election, and you voted in that election, then you should get a ballot. Now, one thing that probably by now you should have gotten this voter guide, and definitely next week you should get a ballot in the mail. And the good news is that the system in California is now that you are entitled to vote and your right to vote will be respected. There's technically a voter registration deadline by August 30th, but if you don't register before August 30th, you can do a conditional registration by going to any of the voting centers. And there'll be more and more of them. They start to open on September 4th, and there'll be a bunch of them open on the weekend starting September 11th. And if you go there and say, I didn't get my ballot, I want to register if I need to and vote, they should check for your registration. If they find it, they should give you a real ballot. If they don't find it, they should allow you to conditionally register or re-register and vote a provisional ballot. But if you're at the same registration address, then you should get a ballot in the mail that allows you to vote by mail. Everybody will.
Excellent. Now, I haven't received my booklet yet, and I imagine a lot of our audience may be in the same place, but I haven't checked my mailbox today.
Yeah, don't be anxious about it. I think mine came just yesterday, and I've heard a couple days ago that people got them. So those are probably making their way through the mail. I would say there's a month until the election day. If by the end of next week you don't have your actual ballot, then what you can do is actually the registrar site, the county registrar site. And Tony or somebody put that in the chat earlier.
Yes.
They have a button to check your registration, and they also have a button to track your ballot. So if you're worried, like you put your ballot in a Dropbox and then afterwards you think, maybe that Dropbox was in a shaky place, I'm worried about it now, you can go on the website and it will tell you when they check your ballot in, it's got a barcode or something that they'll scan, and they'll say, we received your ballot, but we haven't counted it yet. And then later, once they've counted it, they'll say, we have counted your ballot. And so I found that to be really reassuring.
That's good. Excellent. Thank you. Another question that occurred to me is, have you approached or have the local news channels talk to you about repeating some of the information that you're sharing with us in regards to the ballot and how it might be confusing?
Yeah, that's a good point. And we will probably, once I have a cleaner copy of the ballot, because the voter information guide is printed on newsprint, and so it didn't make a very clear image. But once I have a real ballot, we're going to make some images for social media and do some paid advertising to get it out in front of people. And then we'll do a press release. Now, I don't know who might pick that up, but it is the sort of information where we take every opportunity we can to get the media to help us magnify our message without having to pay for it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, next question that's come to us from the audience is, I am voting no, but I do not understand not voting for a replacement. If the recall succeeds, we could end up with a Republican.
Yes, exactly. The problem is with 46 candidates, there's no requirement that it be as much as voted for the governor. There's no requirement that it be above any threshold. It could literally be like 5 or 6% or something like that. And there's just no good way to do that. If it makes you feel better, pick a non-Republican, ideally pick a non-Republican from that side. And that sounds like the least of the worst to you. But the reality is, no candidate you pick is going to have as many votes as some of the well-funded Republican candidates. And so we just need to win on the no question.
Okay, and I think we've probably talked about this next question, but I'm going to read it anyway. What happens if I vote no on the front page, but check a name on the next page?
That's okay. And for people, some people might feel more comfortable with that. So what will happen then is your no vote will get counted as a no vote on the main question. And if more than half the people vote no, then nobody's vote on the second question matters. If more than half the people vote yes, though, then your vote for that one candidate will get counted in that candidate's favor. Got
it. Next question is, what is Newsom's threshold for winning? What is the number or percentage of votes to win?
That's the crazy thing. He can only win because on that big part on the back, he's not listed there. He can't be, by the law is really specific. He can't be listed as a candidate to replace himself. So a good system might be, which of these 47 people do you want to be governor? Gavin Newsom or one of these others? And then people could vote yes for Gavin Newsom. But unfortunately, the way it's set up, you only chance to vote for Newsom is on the first side of the ballot. Vote no. No on the question of recall. Don't fire Gavin Newsom. And if the no's win, then he gets to remain governor. So his threshold is 50.1. or 50.001. He needs more than half the votes to say no, like a ballot measure. And if there are more no's than yeses, then he'll remain governor, and nothing that happens with the other candidates matters. So a funny thing that could happen is that a candidate on the backside could get 60% of the replacement votes, but if Newsom got 50.001, then that wouldn't matter. He would still remain governor. So he has to get over 50%. Now, if he doesn't get to 50%, then the candidate who might win among the replacement candidates might have a much, much lower number. It's an asymmetry and an unfairness that people are focusing on, and I hope will cause us to modify this recall process in the future.
Okay, now I'm running out of questions. So audience, if you've got a comment you'd like to share, use the Q&A feature and tap that button, type in your question or your comment and submit it now. As looks like we're coming to the close of questions.
Bill, I have a question for you.
Sure,
So
yes.
the unexpired term of Gavin Newsom is what at this point?
Well, it depends on how you think about it. Like if it's like until inauguration, it's the rest of this year and all of next year. But the reality is the stupidest thing about the recall in terms of spending $4 gazillion on it or whatever it is the not to mention the money that people are going to spend campaigning on it. Like think about like children and homelessness is driving bonkers if you think too much about it. But the truth is that whatever happens, there will be a gubernatorial primary in June of the coming year, and then a general election in November to elect the governor. So it's it depends. I think of it as being 6 months until you'd have a chance to say, or 9 months until you'd have a chance to say that you want somebody else to be governor anyways. And it's a shame that we're going through this kind of tortured process to get to that point.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
It's
a challenge for the governor because they can't spend a lot of money. Well, it's a challenge in some ways. The campaign finance rules allow them to raise money as if this were a ballot measure. And so in that sense, they can have some big donors that they wouldn't be able to have for him as governor. That I don't like. I'm kind of uncomfortable about that because I don't want somebody giving $3 million even to our governor, right? We don't want anybody to feel like they're owed that much to the support, the financial support of any supporter. And so it kind of opens a big door to that. The governor's team has taken advantage of that because they also have to run for governor in 2022 anyways. So.
Is it your sense, Bill, that there's more energy on one party versus the other around this issue?
Well, there was until about 12 days ago. I think that activists were all in wait mode because of the way the process works. The way the process works, we didn't even know when we would know what the date was.
Wow.
And then our side, for tactical reasons, compressed it and said, okay, well, we're not going to take all the time that the law lets us take. So they could have slow walked it and pushed it really late in the year. And when they chose not to do that, it all collapsed pretty quickly. So for our side, I think it took us a minute to wake up. And then the recent polling, which I think is accurate in terms of awareness at the time of the polls, made people feel like, oh my gosh, we could lose this. We really have to do the work. There's no reason we should lose this. We have more than 20-point advantage in registration, Democrats over Republicans in the state. It's just a matter of people not being confused by the ballot and bothering to do it. And people are still focused on surviving COVID and getting their kids through school safely. I understand it's not the people's biggest priority, and it's not an election time right now. So the real challenge is getting people to pay attention to it. We are engaged with politics. So if we got a thing in the mail that said, here's a special election to elect our dog catcher, I'd pay attention to that. I wouldn't want there to be a bad dog catcher. I certainly wouldn't want there to be a Republican dog catcher. So I'd say, all right, okay, I'm going to figure out what's the right thing to do here. And the question is, will enough Democrats do that?
Yeah, I always describe myself as a yellow dog Democrat. So.
Yes, we need a good Democrat to catch you, I guess.
Bob, I have a few more questions. Can I
Okay,
start?
go for it.
So this is when registering for voting. Do people who omit their email and phone numbers get contacted by the parties, or have those folks effectively opted out of being solicited other than by mail?
Well, we might come to your door is the thing that's increasingly happening. So we use two answers to that question. One is it does some of the people who call people or email people are doing it using information from the voter file at the registrar of voters. But anybody in the villages, I know you have a lot of folks who are retired at different points in time from different industries, and I'm sure there are people in advertising and marketing who know that what happens is they combine these data sets. There are companies that specialize in this. So even if the registration files at the registrar didn't have any email addresses or phone numbers, then there are these companies that would take people's Safeway card and their gas card and other records and figure out who they are and start to enrich those records with that information. So it's true that it's harder to reach people if they don't put that information in their voter file, but it doesn't ensure privacy or not being bothered because people get that data from other sources. And then, of course, depending on what's happening with COVID, I think by 2022, you'll see a lot more Democrats reaching out to voters at their door and adapting to COVID, even if it's still a factor next year, just because in 2020, we lost some House races that we probably should have won, and the Republicans were knocking on doors and we were not. And so I think that the key to 2022 for us is to figure out a way that's actually safe and that our volunteers and voters feel is safe to engage people more personally.
Okay, next is a question that says, what would invalidate a vote? We want to be careful not to make any mistakes on the ballot. Please confirm the key things to fill out on the ballot.
So for our side, I was going to go back to my slide, but I don't want to take the time to do that. For our slide, you remember the slide where you're filling in the little oval for the no. So you want to make sure you get that no. One thing that will never invalidate your ballot is choosing not to fill out every race. So in your regular election, if you get down to the judges and stuff and you feel like you just don't have the information, you can leave that blank. And the fact that you undervote those races does not affect the validity of your vote in other races. What will invalidate your vote is obviously, tears and too many stray marks on your thing so that it can't be optically read. Putting an X or a crayon mark or something like that instead of neatly filling that blob as well as you can. Those might do it. If you vote for more than one candidate on the opposite side, they won't count your vote in that race because they'll consider it to be unclear who you intended to vote for. I saw a question about Gavin Newsom. You can't write Gavin Newsom in for a couple of reasons. One is that there is a provision for writing candidates, but it's not like you can write in anybody. It's like some people can ask to qualify as writing candidates under a second deadline if they missed the first deadline, but they'll be listed on the Secretary of State website. And unless you're one of those people that went through those hoops, writing your name on the ballot won't help. But in addition, for Gavin Newsom, there's a very specific rule that says that he cannot appear on the replacement candidates. So the rule says that if you get recalled, you're out of luck. You can't be listed also on the replacement candidates, even though that would be a better system. Again, if you had a question about that, it might be a little confusing to say, yeah, we want to recall him, but then it turns out he gets more votes than anybody else anyway, so we keep him. At least it wouldn't be weird where a person who replaces him could have many fewer votes than he kind of got in no recall votes. But the system is the way that it is. And I think that whatever you do on the second question, whether it's counted as a valid vote for one candidate or whether it's not counted as a valid vote, whatever you do on that side will not invalidate your no vote. And so for those who are uncomfortable with the advice to just vote the one candidate and not bother with the replacements, just vote no on the recall on the one side and not bother voting on the second side, it's okay. Whatever you do there, it won't invalidate your whole ballot.
Thanks.
Well, I'm assuming like all ballots, you have to put your signature on this. Right?
Yes, yeah, thank you, Bob. That's another important thing. It's the most common thing is that people say, I feel good. Bill James came to our club and said, vote no on the recall. I filled it out. I stuck it in the envelope. I even remember him saying that you don't need postage and then I put it in the mailbox. But it's important that you turn it over and you sign it and date it.
Right.
Yeah.
Good.
You might have to write your residence address too. I don't have mine yet, so I don't know. But
all right.
And I don't know why they make you write your residence address because it's printed on there, but yeah.
Okay.
Another question is, has the Cuomo resignation had any effect on the California recall? The idea being that California voters now know it can be done.
Well, that's interesting. I think that first of all, I think it probably does have a beneficial effect, interestingly, for Gavin Newsom, because what Cuomo was held accountable for was very serious misconduct. There was an actual public investigation supervised by the state attorney general and a report that came out with very specific findings and evidence of conduct that is inconsistent with being a Democratic governor of any state. And I say that it's beneficial because if Cuomo were hanging on despite that, I think that there are a lot of women and allies in the Democratic Party in California who might get a little focused on that and a little upset that there wasn't higher accountability. It might make the governor have to answer a lot of questions about it. So in some sense, it's moving, it'll be forgotten in a few days as a news cycle, except for some kind of follow-up investigation, and people won't be asking Governor Newsom about it. And I think that lets him focus on more positive things, and it doesn't create anything that sucks down attention among our Democratic activists in California.
Thank you. Next question is, what do you know of Kevin Pathrath? Lots of publicity about him.
I don't know anything about him. I think I heard he's like a YouTube celebrity or influencer of some sort. So, it's like, I think that the internet celebrities are very funny because, of course, all celebrities are made up, right? Giant corporations, well-funded corporations in places like Los Angeles and New York and London make up celebrities all the time for the movies and stage. And they just promote them to the point where they become celebrities, and that's a thing that can happen. Now you can do that for yourself and not know anything particularly. This character apparently gives financial advice on the internet, and I know that makes me feel like I'm not going to listen and I'm not going to buy anything from him. But some people apparently he has a following. And it just shows you that on the clown car side of the thing, there's a name recognition aspect. That name comes up because that person is on YouTube and has 1 million people that pay attention to them on YouTube. And so now they're talking on YouTube to people about how they're running for governor. But I suspect that person takes a lot of people's money who hope to be rich by listening to his advice, and that this is an extension of his self-promotion, and that he's in it because he thought it'd be a way to help his YouTube business. And then the elder guy, radio celebrity. So it's a name recognition thing. Nobody knows any of these candidates because they've not been in government, and there's no reason why they should be running for governor. And so if people start looking for a name that they recognize, there might be some people that would know that person.
I see. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
I've come to the last question in the question box area. Again, reminding the audience, if you're formulating a question, submit it in. Next question is, how come the lieutenant governor doesn't become governor if Newsom is recalled?
Yeah, that's a good question. That would also be a good system. The voters, at least by majority vote, picked the lieutenant governor. And the answer is just not the way our Constitution is written. It's meant to be kind of a direct democracy kind of aspect of kind of the populist model of California's government and politics. My guess is that it probably is that when the Constitution got changed to provide for a recall, that the people trying to get rid of the governor also didn't like the lieutenant governor, is my guess, and they set up a system where they could rile people up, get rid of the governor, and replace them with their handpicked person.
Makes sense. It does. Next question is, if question 2 was the only question on the ballot, what would be your recommendation? There's another part to this.
Yeah.
This is the same situation if question 1's recall prevailed.
Yeah, so I think that there's no good answer on question number 2. I think that in a world where there was only going to be a question number 2, then there would be a good Democrat on the list, and that's the person that I would pick. So I think the thing to think about this is that the Constitution requires this 2-step process. Think of it as one question. The question is, which of these 47 people do you want to be governor? Gavin Newsom or one of the other 46? And if you want Gavin Newsom, you vote no. And it doesn't matter what you do on the second page. And
Right.
if you don't, then you'd vote yes, and then pick who it is that you want from the second page. So in that sense, it really is one question.
That makes sense.
It does. The next question, which is the last one here. It appears like the recall criteria is very low bar, 12%. Newsom was elected on a landslide. Are there plans to change the legislatures on recall criteria?
I think depending on what happens, there will be plans to do that. I think people can see that there's defects in it. And we have in Santa Clara County, Mark Berman from my district, Assembly District 24, is the chair of the Assembly Elections Committee. And I think that they couldn't do anything right away because it'd make people worried about it, but I think it's going to be on their list to address. So that person's question points out that instead of 12%, which seems kind of random, maybe it would be some percentage based on the number of percentage of votes that he got, in which case for Newsom, because he won by such a big margin, it might be a bigger number. That's a pretty sensible thought, and one I'm going to tell Mark Berman.
I think Dwayne has a question for you, Bill.
Sure.
Bill, I wonder if you have any insight into the coverage that Channel 7 gave last night. They did a half hour, or better part of half hour hit piece on Gavin Newsom. And I just wondered if you know anything why that happened.
I haven't seen it or heard anything about it, and I think that's interesting. Sometimes politicians cross a reporter or a newsroom editor, and that they gleefully expose their most negative news and hide the positive news. I do know that every campaign and every office holder has a person whose job it is to be in contact with the press, and they can't make everybody like him, but they kind of learn which ones are going to give him more fair shake and which ones might even lean favorably to him. And so for every show like that, hopefully there'll be some others that are a little more balanced and a little more fair. And I think there's been pretty honest and decent reporting about how unsuitable most of these recall replacement candidates are. That's the media is hard,
Well, I was going to say that if you have access to that, I think I'd urge you to look at it, because it looked to me like they spent a lot of time putting a lot of pieces together, and then they were able to weave in the French Laundry thing with it, which really didn't have much to do with policy.
Yeah, exactly. And that's, again, when the governor shoots himself on the foot like that, it's frustrating and just hands things to people that can use like that, because it's kind of, riles people up and casts them in a bad light. I think that I don't know, sometimes you see a politician like this, and Newsom is one of them. He's really capable. I think he's a good person. I agree with him about policy, but there's just something about him that rubs some people the wrong way. And maybe, I joked earlier about his, having too much gel in his hair or something like that. People might think he's too flashy, or that his ambitions are run too high. He wants to be president, maybe. But I think if you look at his record and what he's really done, he's been a good governor, and it was a good mayor of San Francisco, and has his own personal style. And I think that we as Democrats would do good to keep him.
Thank you. Now, this is a comment that is related to the previous question. When we talked about the lieutenant governor, why that person is not automatically replacing the governor's position. So this comment says, but the lieutenant governor is independently elected.
Yeah, that's a good
more
point.
Sensible.
And my guess is, again, that it goes back to 100 years ago, and Hiram Walker's lieutenant governor being somebody that the people who got the recall law passed didn't like. But it's a good point. I think that Eleni Kounalakis would be a lot better than any of these replacement candidates, and she won a lot more votes than any of them is likely to get. And so that would be a more sensible thing too. And that's another reform, I'm sure, that would come up. So you could have a two-step thing. If you didn't want the lieutenant governor to take over a full term or most of a term, you could recall the governor, have the lieutenant governor be in charge, and do another special election to pick to see if for governor, to see if the lieutenant governor would be able to win or not. But those are all good points, and a much more sensible thing than the craziness we have now. And I see people saying the Elizabeth Warren ad, we should find the link to that, although people are probably seeing it on TV. And I love Elizabeth Warren. She was kind of my favorite. I can reveal now. I always keep my personal preferences close to the vest so that's not to alienate volunteers. But she was my first choice in the presidential field. And so I love her. And I think she did a great job with that ad, because I think she just has a good manner and hits the right tone for why Democrats should, be upset about this.
Bill, we will not let Uncle Joe, President Uncle Joe, know about this.
Yeah, that's right. I'm glad that he's president. I worked hard for that too.
Here's another comment. The reality is there are two questions, and if yes prevail, question 2 is what is on the ballot. Your answer that there is a Democrat that would be a better choice is not what we are faced with. For this election, what do you recommend?
I'm going to leave mine blank, because I consider it to be one question. Which of these 47 people do you want to be governor? And I want it to be Gavin Newsom, so I'm going to vote no on the recall, and I'm going to mail it in. And people should do that and not be concerned at all. It's not even a hard choice. There is literally not a single candidate of any north and on the replacement side.
Totally agree. Yeah.
That's it for questions.
In fact, it's a good question. In fact, I think not voting for any of them is a way to lodge one's sentiment that that's the case, and I think it's true.
Very good.
I think.
Bob, I hand it off to you.
Yes, Bob. Time
Yeah,
to say
so,
goodbye.
yeah, Bill, I just want to thank you so much. And as you always do, you hit it over the fence. So really
Yeah, well, I
appreciate it.
appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
We love to have you back when we can offer you wine and cheese as our payment for being a speaker.
Yes.
Yeah, where is the celebration party?
Well, we were disappointed we haven't been able to meet in person, so.
Yeah,
We
it's
did
been
have a-
hard. It's been hard for everybody. I have 3 teenagers, as I mentioned, and they had varying experiences getting through the pandemic. And one of them is definitely a social young lady, and she's,
Yeah, I can
wanting
imagine.
to be back in school with her people.
I can imagine. We were able to have an outdoor picnic.
Oh, that's nice. Good.
For the party here, but yeah,
Good.
it was unfortunately over 90 degrees that day, but we managed about 50 people. So
Oh, that's
anyway,
great.
I want to thank you so much. I want to
Thank
thank
you.
our audience for hanging with us. I'm sure everyone here realizes the importance of this. So get out there and